For all of my poets out there who like to get deep into their feels, you guys need to hear about John Berryman's perspective on writing. John Berryman is the head of the American confessional poetry movement. Without him, most poetry books you on shelves today would not be anywhere as good as they are, or wouldn't even exist. And John really was a protege of Walt Whitman and Rilke and Auden and so many other great emotional poets that came before him. But he really turned it up to a new level. He brought in lust and sex, alcoholism, drugs, adultery, all the nasty things. And he was a very weird and not very good person, but his writing speaks volumes. His book, Dream Songs, is an absolute masterpiece. And if you guys don't believe me about how good he is, go check out some of his poems online. And you will see, especially in the time period he was writing in, right after World War II in the 40s and 50s. He ended up dying in 1972 by jumping off of a bridge. He was absolutely crazy, spent most of his time in and out of mental hospitals or teaching at universities. And we'll get into some of that in a bit. So let's talk about some of John Berryman's perspectives. And they were very hard to find. I first had to read his book of letters. Then I read probably only 10 or 20 interviews I could find, and then some anecdotal information from his family and colleagues. And I still got almost nothing. So he was very sparse with his information on writing, and who knows why. So let's hop into it. So first of all, quote. I mean, if you recognize what shit you were writing, you wouldn't write it. You have to believe in your stuff. Every day has to be the new day on which the new poem may be it. So I'm sure if you're listening to this right now, you're not making millions of dollars being a famous poet, right? So, and a lot of you guys are beginner authors. So you have to believe in yourself though. My poetry right now isn't anywhere where it's going to be in 30 years. 30 years from now, I'm going to look at what I'm writing now and be like, wow, that was kind of crap. But I have to believe I'm the best desert poet in the world. Right now, I think I'm better at writing desert poetry than anybody else in the world, and I will stand by that. But if I didn't feel like that, then why would I make the effort? You have to believe in yourself. You have to know that you are the best and that you are writing stuff that is out of this world, or you wouldn't do it. What would be the point? And I know there's a lot of people out there who write a lot of crap and they're just doing it for an aesthetic. But if you are actually serious about this, you have to believe in yourself and you have to come into every single day with that confidence, or you will get muddled down by doubt. And another piece of advice that John gives, before we get into a lot of the technical, practical stuff, is that don't read reviews. Don't read comments. Don't read reviews. If you are trying to put work out there, then don't read anything. You have to continue focusing on the work. Listen to your friends. Listen to other poets who you know are good, accomplished people, teachers, writers, reviewers who you know and who will be honest with you. But don't, listen to other people, because there will always be negative, crazy things out there. So let's hop into our first quote from the day. And that is this quote: "You should be always trying to write a poem you're unable to write, a poem you lack the technique, the language, the courage to achieve. Otherwise, you are merely imitating yourself, going nowhere, because that's always easiest." And I see this all the time, that when you hand a poem over to somebody, maybe you're in a creative writing workshop, or you're having a friend or an editor revise it, it should be experimental. It should not make sense, because the editor or who's ever editing it will help bring it down to reality. You should have pushed the limit so far that you are unsure of this poem, that you don't even know what this means. I mean, you should know what it means, obviously, but it should be a little bit past what you are willing or able usually to write. And this does so much for your soul, because first of all, you're putting yourself out there and you're pushing yourself. Imagine if you were an Olympic gymnast and you never push yourself. You would never be an Olympic gymnast. You would never go even far. But poets like to stay in their comfort zone all the time because they are worried about what other people think and what it sounds like or what it is. And when we are dealing with our mind and emotions and with poetry, because if we are trying to talk about good poetry, if you want to write good poetry, you have to be able to beat John Berryman, who died 50 years ago. There are levels to the game, and if you can't outcompete people from 50 years ago, then what are you doing? And then you're not really even an intermediate poet yet. You're still a beginner until you can beat people who are long dead. And so the bar keeps getting set higher and higher as time continues on, and you have to dedicate more and more time and understand technique more and learn from the mistakes of these authors if you want to transcend them. And the way that you're going to do that is not getting muddled down, because for a while, for even decades, you will not be as good as John Berryman or other poets. But as the decades progress and as you keep practicing, and believing in yourself and trying to push the limits, then you will expand out of that hole. And here's another thing that John Berryman did that a lot of poets don't do. He surrounded himself with successful writers. He met T.S. Eliot. He met Yeats. He was friends with Dylan Thomas. He knew, literally everybody. The names are flying over my head. He knew Lowell. He knew every single big poet, anyone who was anyone back then, he was trying to hang out with, surrounded by, at least had some form of interaction with. And he didn't learn anything from them. That's what he said. He got nothing from any of these people, really. He learned a lot of things and got good edits from his editor or random friends or teacher or other professors, but no big name poets. But when you surround yourself with other people who are in it, who are dedicating their life and who are talented, you get raised up. And a lot of people fail, and a lot of people get sucked into the trap of MFA programs, thinking, oh, I need to go to an MFA program. That might be good, but every single professor or student or poet in the world has friends, right? So let's imagine your favorite poet in the world. They have friends, and 99.9%, probably 99% of their friends are their friend, became their friends not in some professional setting. They became their friends by maybe reaching out to them or being around them. That's why I always tell people, you don't need to go to university. Just hit people up, trying to hang out with them, because it's the same process. Because, okay, let's say you go to a university and now one of your professors is your favorite author. Well, you get a little bit of advice from them, will kind of be detached. But if you're really cool and you have a good vibe with them, then they'll maybe invite you to hang out with them more. Maybe once your career's over, your degree's over with. Same thing though in IRL. You could hit them up and say, hey, I really want to meet you, or go to a book signing and tell them what you're about and what you're doing. And maybe they'll hit you up. If they like your vibe, they'll continue wanting to hang out with you. And that's what it's really about, is that time spent, time really hanging out with these people, and not just getting some poems reviewed or taking a class. And this is just capitalism. This is the university lie. This is why almost no MFAs now are any good, because they're not surrounding themselves and being social with other poets. And here we go. Here's another example. Most poets are either very reclusive, so if you're going to take that route, go do that. Go be the reclusive nature poet. You'll be great. Or they are, very social. So next quote, and this is a longer one. I started out writing 3 stanzas a day, but that was too much. So I developed a more orderly method. I got one of those things that have a piece of glassine over a piece of paper, and you can put something in between and see it but not touch it. I would draft my stanza and put it there. Then I would sit and study it. I would make notes, but I wouldn't touch the manuscript until I thought I was in business. Usually not for hours. Then I'd take it out, make the corrections, put it back in, and study it some more. When I was finally satisfied, I'd take it out and type it. At that point, I was done. I never touched any stanza afterward. I limited myself to 1 a day. If I finished at 11 in the morning, I'd still not look at the next stanza until the next morning. I had a terrible time filling the hours. Whiskey was helpful, but it was hard. So, Berryman, very unique method. He would just do 1 stanza a day, basically. He would write a stanza out and then study it for hours. And look at this type of dedication. If you were wondering why you aren't making money with poetry, why aren't you a published poet? Why aren't people talking about you on YouTube right now? How often do you spend hours focusing on 1 stanza among a bunch of other duties? Berryman was a professor, a lustful adulterator of many different people, and an alcoholic. It's pretty hard. It's very time consuming being an alcoholic and a drug addict and mentally unstable. So, he would write 1 stanza a day and then not touch it, but study it for hours, making notes, but then probably playing with the stanza. And this is very important. Revision is the key. Revision is where all the magic happens. So, hours a day on 1 stanza. And if you think about it though, if we have 365 days in the year, that is 365 stanzas. That is more than 1 poetry book per year. If you kept this pace up of just 1 good stanza a day, you could publish. That could even be 2 poetry books a year. How many poetry books are you doing right now? So you might be sitting down and waiting to write that one big, a lot of poets never go anywhere because they think they need to write in these big chunks, right? Sit down, I'm going to write for 3 hours. Well, how about if you're struggling with writing, just writing 1 stanza, then for the rest of the day, just having it around, especially if you're busy. Let's say you're really busy. You have kids, you have a job. Wake up, or at any time during the day, write a stanza you feel good about. Let's say you feel good about a stanza. Then just have it around for the rest of the day. Just be looking at it. Like, write it down on a piece of paper, on and just be looking at the paper, making some notes, thinking about it. And then by the end of the day, maybe you've turned that into something really good. That's a better method than like waiting for motivation or like waiting for Saturday to write, like just trying to get whatever you can done. And that's what you can do with poetry. With fiction, it's a little bit harder. What am I going to do? Carry around a paragraph? You can for sure. But with poetry, it's a lot easier, especially if we're just thinking in stanzas. And then by the end of the year, you have 365. So let's say at halfway through the year, you have 180 stanzas. That's enough for a book, maybe. And then you sit down for a month or two and just revise it really hard, and then send it out. I guarantee you'll have a lot. That's a pretty good chance of getting published. Like if you're a good poet and you feel like you have some good skills, and if you do that for a couple years, then you write a poetry book, you should get published. You should be able to make a couple $1,000s, because that's all the best poets really make, unless you're at the very top. So that's, I think, very good advice, and slowing things down. And once again, what's your excuse? We have a crazy man who has a lot of problems in his life, including addiction, lust, violence, being unclean, being weird, and who has a full-time job and is a scholar and a teacher, and he's finding time to do this and release a ton of work and maintain a pretty crazy social life. What's your excuse, everybody? And then another big thing is that he wouldn't look at it for hours once he was done. Once he felt settled with it for the day, then you should forget about it. That's another thing. A lot of people, I was just talking about obsessing over it all day. Once you feel like you have something good, then maybe go on with life. If you have a family, if you have a partner or a cat, or like your own health or your other hobbies, writing doesn't have to be everything, especially if you look at it. How old are you? You probably have decades left to live. So take your time. Your contributions, it's better to have a couple good books than, 20 mediocre books out there. If you want to make an impact, if you want to, shake some things up, and, it's better to, and it's above that, it's better to write a book every once in a while and be trying to create change in the world through other methods that are a little bit more feasible in this post-literate world. If you are actually trying to make a change, if you're actually trying to make a positive impact on the world, writing is one way to do it, and you should have some writing and books out there. But there are a lot of other, even more effective ways to create a positive ripples in the world other than writing. And don't be a John Berryman, everybody. Don't be a jerk. If you are a bad person right now, if you can't physically control yourself, if you are violent, an adulterator, an addict, dude, take a year or two off from writing and go take care of that. Please. I don't understand. Do you want to end up like John Berryman? Especially a lot of the confessional types. So that's what I've heard this a lot, that the confessional poets, the poets who like to get into their fields, and I can see this today, but if we look back at that generation, Anne Sexton, Sylvia Plath, they all killed themselves. They have so many problems. And because when you head up into the ether, it's a lot harder to understand where you're at. And a lot of people now with digital technology on top of that, why is there so much depression? Why do every single poet I know is I'm like the only non-depressed poet I know that I feel like is at least decent or trying to be good. I don't want to rate myself, but I'm aspiring through the dedication of time to be good, and I'm not depressed, and I'm very happy with my life. But every other poet I know has I know this, one of my poetry professors, he was like, the day I graduated and got my MFA, I tied a noose in my room, put it around my neck, and thought about jumping. I had nothing, there was no purpose left. And it's like, dude, shut up, man. I wanted to slap him. I was like, dude, I slapped the suicidal guy, right? But no, I was just like, dude, come on, man. This is a joke now. What are we turning into right now? All right, so let's look at another quote. And like I said, why would you choose that? You don't, depression. You can't solve depression overnight. You can't solve the feelings of suicide overnight. But you can, over the course of years, through dedication, at least alleviate some of those symptoms. And why not focus on that? Because your writing will be better. Don't be the artiste manqué, the suffering artist. That's old news. Don't do it. There's no reason to do it anymore. The art is almost useless anyway. If you are a writer, it's at least have fun doing it, because most likely you're not going to make that much money doing it. So at least feel good while you're doing it, but I understand that a lot of people write because they have trauma and want to, share that trauma and beat the trauma. And, all right. So a long poem demands the construction of a world rather than the reliance upon one already existent. So John Berryman, Dream Songs, a lot of his other books, can't remember his other one right now, that does this long form poem, very long epic poetry, right? And if you are a long or epic poet, A lot of the times, we want a new world. You're basically writing a novella or a novel for us. So imagine, a lot of great books, even novels that are based in reality, they create a different world. They create different circumstances. You have to do the same thing in your poems, in a book of long poems. And there's a really great one. I think the guy's name is Ronald Johnson. He has a book called Arc. Go check out that one. That one's more recent, long poem, that kind of surpasses Berryman, this is the next step in evolution. And a lot of long form poets, they don't create a very stable world, and that's good. Be creative. You don't have to go full sci-fi, but have some elements that aren't reliant upon this world, and you will go further, and you will keep the reader more interested, because long form poetry is actually very hard. It's very, I'm sure, as you know, if you've ever read long form poetry, it's actually very challenging for the reader to read down with line breaks, and on top of the poetic language and the vagueness and the ambiguity, to be able to follow it and actually understand what's going on. So a lot of things are working against you, so you might as well create a more creative and fun world that, for the reader to follow. Our next quote, we are now going to read a quick poem to end by Berryman. Monster, you are killing me. Be sure I'll have you later. Women do endure. I can no longer. And it passes the wretched trap whelming, and I am me, drenched and powerful. I did it with my body. One proud tug greens heaven, marvelous, unforbidding majesty. Swell, imperious bells, I fly. And a lot of people are pushing back on Berryman now because he is a, quote, adulterous, alcoholic, sexist, self-involved, racist male poet who can only write about his own consciousness. Because also in one of his books, he was writing from the perspective of, at times in the book, interlacing like black speak, not it's like speaking like a black man, and I guess that's not allowed as a white man anymore, but who knows. But there's a lot of criticism now about Berryman and what he was doing. He's obviously a very troubled figure, but reading his poems and his language, you know and can tell that he has a mastery over the English language. Really, only other in terms of getting his emotions out in that era, his only rival was Bob Dylan. So check him out. Let me know what you guys think of John Berryman. There's really nothing online on YouTube right now about Berryman, and once again, so influential in so many different ways for, in the next, when he died in the 70s, the 80s and 90s were almost shaped by Berryman, but that's what happens to a lot of legends. They are forgotten. So subscribe, like this video, and check out more videos right here about writing poetry. Peace.